The importance of keeping a secret. Secrets are power. When you divulge a secret, you barter the potential power of your hidden knowledge for the fleeting ego boost that comes with its revelation. It is a natural urge to want to impress others by disclosing something thought to be of value, especially when self-esteem is weak or waning. The disclosure is made to one-up someone else. There are 4 kinds of secrets. The first kind assures the teller of its continued application, without giving the game away. A renowned concert pianist can reveal, with relative security, secrets of his keyboard technique to a man who has never touched a piano. If the same pianist confides an escapade in the bushes with a 9-year-old boy, however, the most unaccomplished acquaintance suddenly has power over him. The latter revelation is the second type of secret, the skeleton in the closet secret, which often enables one to wield power over another, regardless of social, mental, or economic differences. Employed for financial gain, it constitutes extortion. Wielded as a means of control, it is merely vampiric ego sustenance. Unfortunately, a guarded principle is often usable by persons of scant accomplishment, hence the stringent security maintained by innovators and inventors. This is the third type of secret. Unlike the second variety, the revelation of which can undermine the stature of the teller, the third will allow any novice to duplicate that which was formerly limited to the savant. The guy who finds he can double his car's mileage by dropping an inexpensive capsule in his gas tank is a classic example. Such procedures are invariably discovered rather than imparted. A simple formula is far less likely to be revealed than a complex one, but the simplest formulas are usually the most elusive. The fourth variety of secret is that employed in the interrogation and espionage techniques. The revealing of a useless piece of information in order to elicit a valid disclosure. In other words, an exchange of a worthless item for a genuine one. To sum up the foregoing, the first type of secret is safe to reveal but better to conceal. The second type is certain to undermine its subject by its telling. The third variety will allow the receiver to duplicate what the teller has done. The fourth is a trick of lesser or manipulative magic preying upon a prurient or larcenous nature. The holder of a valid secret possesses a tangible and viable commodity, and therefore wields the upper hand over those who lack his knowledge. Awareness of this treasure gives him confidence and strength that will project to others. Even if he does not employ the secret, its ready accessibility contributes to his security. Children soon find that they can elicit attention and candy from other children by announcing, "I've got a secret." Some means of ensuring that a secret will be kept. 1. Fear. The threat of dire consequences, should the secret be revealed, is the most common means. A fine method, except for many people, laws are made to be broken, and secrets meant to be divulged. A self-destructive person will find a fertile playground for his masochistic tendencies by revealing secrets, for he places himself in a precarious position for retribution from others. He induces both hostility and rejection while receiving the ego gratification that accompanies a grand exposé. He positions himself as a hero, thus qualifying his potential punishment as martyrdom. I have observed this type of behavior in nuns who run away from a convent only to look forward to penance imposed upon them once they return. Hysterics have joined the Church of Satan, defected, revealed what they supposed to be secrets, and tremblingly waited for a closed limousine to abduct them and bring them to a secret lair, where they might be made to endure fierce and delicious punishments. Fear of retribution alone is probably the least effective deterrent. The oaths taken at fraternal and occult initiations, implying that the candidate will be torn asunder should he divulge secrets, are virtually worthless, since it is assumed such mayhem will not actually occur. The more upstanding and respectable an organization, the less validity such oaths present. Fraternal orders usually depend upon the next category, despite their bloodthirsty oaths. Ostracism. Ostracism is a very real threat. To work, the keeper of a secret must place no small amount of dependency upon the fellowship his comrades provide. Fraternal groups employ this deterrent, especially in communities where ostracism can mean business loss in addition to social rejection. Some secret orders impose a sort of statute of limitation as a result of indiscretions. This means that if the candidate's trustworthiness is found lacking, he will find himself limited to a lower peer group where classified material is not known. Once it has become general knowledge that such a separation process exists, anyone with an eye toward advancement will exercise discretion. The obvious disadvantage of ostracism is that its effectiveness is limited to a social environment. A member might be a paragon of discretion while residing where he is dependent on his brothers for emotional and economic security. Should he move away, with no thought of returning, however, he will often spill the beans to acquire fresh recognition. 3. Ridicule. If a secret is far-fetched or padded with asinine antics, many will think twice about revealing it, lest their listeners look down on them for their lunacy. Hence, many valid secrets have been surrounded by the trappings of an apparently laughable nature. Many lodge brothers, especially those of a highly businesslike and respectable demeanor, would hesitate to describe rituals wherein they were made to dress up as women, ride a goat, urinate on the floor, lie in coffins, etc. Such antics, within context, have symbolic meaning, but a casual explanation somehow guarantees that they will still be taken out of context. 4. Silence. The most effective way to ensure secrecy is to not divulge a secret in the first place. The greatest magical secrets are those that, if told, would alienate the listener from the teller. If a magician would respect a student enough to divulge such secrets, he would not wish to alienate him. Consequently, such secrets are never told. They are discovered. The fact that discovery is a desirable human occurrence ensures its contrived use as a means of exploitation and control. The discovery game. If you want people to wholeheartedly accept what you have to offer, let them discover it, a la the Easter egg method. Now, you all remember how the Easter egg hunt worked. Somebody got up early, earlier than anyone else, and went out with the eggs that were later to be discovered by the kids. He or she hid them in places where they could be found, but not without a bit of a search. All the kids could hardly wait to get started. Of course, they all arrived at the same location. None of them went to another site unless they were awfully stupid or misdirected by a scurrilous chum. As each kid discovered an egg, he would holler with joy. Occasionally, a parent, upon seeing their offspring's discovery from the sidelines, would holler too. The child who amassed the greatest number of eggs usually received some sort of recognition, often a hollow chocolate bunny. You know as well as I that those kids couldn't care less about the eggs once they got them home. Pop invariably got them in his lunchbox for the next week. The point is that a false demand can be created where there is absolutely no need for a product, simply by creating an opportunity for discovery. John Doe finds the opportunity to discover something so attractive because he has not, will not, and could not discover anything on his own in a lifetime. What's worse, a tiny voice inside him lets him know it. So when someone comes along who provides an opportunity to ameliorate an inherent lack of perception, the opportunity is seized. If you doubt what you have just read, consider how the hidden persuaders employ the magic word discover. Discover this new taste treat, cajoles the commercial, and one's unconscious leaps to the lure. The same lure on a nickel and dime level that on a loftier plane drove Ponce de Leon, Sir Richard Burton, Leif Erikson, Columbus, Peary, and the Shadow, who, several years ago in the Orient, learned a strange and mysterious secret: the power to cloud men's minds. Occultism for the millions. I have always harbored a natural repugnance toward fads. When the most rewarding and exhilarating interest becomes a fad, its evocative qualities enjoyed by the few are diminished by mass acceptance. This must not be confused with being jaded. To be jaded does not imply that many others are doing the same thing, but that one no longer finds stimulation in it. Often one can become jaded with something, only to return later to it after a passage of time creates the reawakening known as nostalgia. Occasionally my eyes will light up at hearing or reading about discovery or innovation on the part of someone engaged in the exploration of the unknown. This trait is analogous to true Satanism. For every such Promethean individual, there are 100 others proving their prowess in magic by sitting in pyramids, building orgone cabinets, photographing leaves, and tracing Dracula's past. If I hear of a person looking for fairies in his garden, at least I am amused at his singular pursuit, for few seek fairies in their own gardens any longer. There is nothing wrong with sitting in pyramids or constructing orgone accumulators, any more than eating banana splits or skydiving. But if you fancy yourself a magician, don't flatter yourself on the merits of your investigations. You are neither innovative nor farsighted, just going along with a fad. A prime example of occult faddist chicken with a beak on the line methodology is their tendency to grab up anything that has been set forth as arcane. When Wilhelm Reich was discovered by the occult movement, they failed to recognize that, as I stated on the dedication page of the Satanic Bible, he knew more than cabinet making. How many have pursued theories advanced in the cancer biopathy? Who has attempted to duplicate Reich's cloud busting and to relate it to the rainmaking principles of Charlie Hatfield or Aboriginal shamans? Who knows a good case of character armor when he sees it, or has expanded upon the function of the orgasm? Because enclosures are all the rage, and occult journals expound their ramifications, so long as they are pyramidal, Reich's following is largely limited to cabinet makers. It's a cinch that if you read it in an occult periodical or paperback, everyone's doing it. That should be your cue to avoid such stuff, lest you be relegated to the same readership level. As time proceeds, the table tipping of Annie Besant becomes the Curlian photography of today. The Ouija board becomes the mind machine unit, complete with flashing red LEDs and subliminal sound. And turbaned East Indian swamis move aside for psychic rescue squads. Mediums, channelers. It still takes far more practice and skill to type well than to read auras, or to change a transmission than to make predictions like, a famous singer will have marital difficulties this year. Pop occultism is fodder for nincompoops, and its only merit is that it detracts from established religious mores. Occult, hidden knowledge will seldom be found in obvious sources. The very phrase, popular occult movement, is a contradiction in terms. Satanism cannot rightly qualify as an occult phenomenon, and I have never claimed it as such. One's personal delvings can be considered occult in the true sense of the term only if they remain outside the pale of supernormal faddism. The would-be innovator asks, if I cannot find food for thought in source material akin to my interests, where then? The answer is found in the analogy that one does not find oneself. One creates oneself. Magical power is accrued by reading unlikely books, employing unlikely situations, and extracting unlikely ingredients, then utilizing those elements for what would be considered occult ends. After one has observed the results of such creative unions, what was originally considered unlikely will be seen as the most easily understandable methodology. The blow-off, or Kroger Bab. Where are you now that we need you? For creating intrigue, an ambiguous statement is infinitely preferable to the straightforward one. The more intrigue created, the more frantic others become to partake of what you have to offer. For example, as a Satanist, I am sometimes asked about sex orgies by the deeply frustrated. A knowing wink will do more to get them slavering than any amount of lurid description. It would be senseless to improve upon the explicit vistas provided by modern photographers. I'll never forget a man I worked with on a carnival's back lot who ran what was known as a sex show. Not to be confused with a girly show. The sex show consisted of a tent lined with medical posters ostensibly demonstrating the wonders of the human reproductive system, the ravages of VD, and the breasts and buttocks of Hottentot women in various stages of development. Behind roped-off sections were exhibits. A waxen two-headed baby, known in the trade as a pickled punk, a couple of medieval chastity belts made by a Tucson sheet metal worker, an array of tongs, forceps, catheters, and breast pumps under glass, a reproduction in wax of a noseless face of an unfortunate syphilitic gentleman, and other educational wonders. A doctor would get the rubes into the tent by appearing on the bally platform with a rather sleazy blonde wench, dressed in a nurse's uniform 2 sizes too small and in need of laundering. With a dented reflector fitted to his forehead and a stethoscope around his neck, the surgical smock doctor would blame the microcephalic condition of a pinhead, borrowed here from a sideshow, as a result of improper genetics. The pinhead, standing at the doctor's side, would simper innocently, nodding its little cranium in unknowing agreement. The doctor didn't sell medicine, as one might have expected him to, and proceeded with a far more sophisticated game. After the customers filed into the tent to view the secrets of mankind and the miracle of life, the magic would really begin. When the 10-minute guided tour ended at the last exhibit, the pickled punk presented with a brief discourse on improper sex education, a dim glow could be seen through a tent flap hung at the extreme rear of the museum, next to where Doc was holding court. Presumably, the light came from his living quarters, where the yokels were inclined to peek through. While the marks were furtively looking through the lit-up flap, the doctor was beginning his big pitch. Since the audience consisted only of males, which usually was the case, maybe they would like to see firsthand the modern method of sexual hygiene. In hushed tones, the doc announced that they would be shown practices and things which were to be avoided in order to maintain a sound mind and body. Those who chanced to glance through the tent flap during the doc's build-up saw the aforementioned dirty nurse reclining on a shabby cot reading a movie magazine, her ample thighs revealed above the tops of her stockings. A small nightstand next to her carried an immense jar of Vaseline. On the wall, directly above the nurse's cot, was pinned a slightly whiter piece of bedsheet, suggesting a motion picture screen. The remaining area was occupied by about 20 folding chairs. A folding card table stood against the tent wall opposite the cot, supporting a scuffed movie projector. From what was glimpsed, this was a show that should not be missed. The small knot of rubes that had remained to listen and peek were by this time hanging on to the doctor's every word, who announced limited seating available for the show about to begin in the inner tent. Seats were only an extra 50 cents, but the lecture and demonstration was, quote, only allowed to be shown to serious students of art, anatomy, or medicine. Perceiving the gleam in the eye of serious students, Doc then made the final pitch before bringing out his roll of tickets. Well, all I can say, fellows, is that you're going to see something today that you'll remember as long as you live. As the words were being spoken, he cautiously bent forward, as if to better observe anyone who might have crept into the tent unnoticed. He then lifted his outstretched middle finger for all to see, and closed his other hand into a sheath, which he slid over the projected middle finger 3 or 4 times, slyly winking as he did so. No further enticement was required. The doctor couldn't rip the tickets off the roll fast enough, and when the audience finally found themselves seated, the overripe nurse was nowhere to be seen. She was outside on the bally platform, with Doc, warming up a new crowd, while an assistant materialized within the auditorium. What the rubes did see was a 16mm movie showing a cesarean delivery and subsequent incubator care of an infant, followed by a superbly acted Office of War Information produced drama, a tender story of a GI who meets a girl on a furlough and, neglecting to obtain a rubber, contracts a social disease. The 15-minute epic ends with 5 glorious minutes of tight close-ups of oozing chancres, eaten away palates, and running sores. By the end, all unconsumed popcorn, snow cones, and orange drinks had been abandoned under the seats, and at least one rustic lad had fallen ill. None manifested disappointment that the show was over. The doctor shall remain anonymous, for he now may be practicing in some large hospital. One thing is certain, however. Prurience thrives on ambiguity, and the need for mystery in everyone's life demands subtlety, suitably dispensed. The whoopee cushion shall rise again. Not long ago I was told of an enterprise in New York called Agents of Pi Kill Unlimited. That noble venture, whose motto is "Have pie, will travel," specializes, for a fee, in performing edible indignities upon likely candidates. In addition to pie-in-the-face attacks, they render such services as seltzer water barrages and squirt gun contracts. Their tactics are in the strict tradition of past experts like the Three Stooges, Laurel and Hardy, and Max Sennett. Pie Kill is dedicated, among other things, to the stamping out of pomposity. Which brings me to an important factor, one which practicing Satanists should consider in their worldview: comedy. The twin masks of tragedy and comedy exist as irrevocably as any other duality. Yet it is the mask of tragedy that is worn most often for magical means. Desire for that which is unfulfilled is always a little bit tragic, and those who frequent the ritual chamber most often lead the most tragic lives. In order to generate an emotional response conducive to a successful working, one cannot easily extract humor, nor, in most circumstances, should one try. Frequently, humor can serve to alleviate or attain a situation before solemn ritualization becomes relevant or required. Unfortunately, for a multitude of occultists, humor is a rare ingredient in their lives. In fact, it is their very lack of humor that has impelled them into the arcane and esoteric. Someone once commented to me that a sorcerer without a sense of humor would be intolerable. I agree, and will add that, in addition to being intolerable, he would be incompetent. Candidates for pies in the face are far more plentiful than ever. Less messy but equally inhumane indignities are easily implemented. I have places in spanning a 50-year period, 1900 to 1950, the golden era of practical trickery. After 1950, people start getting crazy notions about human dignity, and the practical joke was neglected for the serious protest. The change was needed, but something was lost in the process, as is usually the case. Now fun is poked at institutions rather than at individuals. A sort of collective humor has replaced what was once a personalized pratfall. Mad and the National Lampoon, entertaining as they are, have provided a like-minded readership with universal victims. The butts of jokes are no longer selected with careful deliberation, but are ridiculed en masse. Purveyors of joke items like Johnson Smith & Co. no longer send 600-page catalogs to customers, but live on past glories with thin catalogs. As time approaches, though, when seers like Jeanne Dixon will sit upon a number 2953, the whoopee cushion, or poo-poo cushion as it is sometimes called, is made of rubber. When the victim unsuspectingly sits upon the cushion, it gives forth noises that can be better imagined than described. By mail postpaid, number 2953, 25 cents. All is not lost. A host of solemn and humorless victims are being primed for not only pie kill, but poo-poo cushions, joy buzzers, black eye telescopes, trombone nose blowers, itching powder, rubber chewing gum, dribble glasses, and squirting stick pins. Too long have curses and anger been wasted on undeserving victim, whose most devastating insecurities could be brought forth by a harmless practical joke, one which a more secure person would accept with a mild annoyance at worst and amusement at best. Those who deserve ridicule have been living in a climate that provides relative immunity, while their pomposity has gone unchallenged and even encouraged. Satanists are anathema to the pious, the sanctimonious, and the hypocritical. They should also be the nemesis of the pompous. Satanists, attention! Right shoulder whoopee cushions. To the rear. Harch! The threat of peace. Eustress is a term that describes an emotional state of fun fear or pleasurable discomfort. Although they are antonyms, we shall see how what begins as distress can lead to eustress. Since most people live their lives in a programmed series of distress and fears, a social environment wherein security and comfort are only present if a certain amount of crisis prevails. The human mind abhors a vacuum. Wild animals have no such problem. Every cell of their brains functions. Only when domesticated or conditioned is a necessary survival engram replaced by another. Man is the only animal who must be continually reminded of existence. Any sensation will do. In other words, something must happen, lest life become not only meaningless, but genuinely painful. How many times is the expression heard, "What's happening?" A Satori-like Shangri-La existence eagerly sought by many would be unbearable if realized. Not because of the pressures of peace, but by the inability of most minds to independently devise enough thoughts to maintain mental stimulation. Stress has become such a normative, and therefore comfortable, way of life, that it has become necessary to people's existence. A paradox has evolved wherein humans are constantly bombarded by stress situations, which they crave, and then cautioned to reduce their craving. This remarkable sequence can be likened to the weekday sinner who goes to church each Sunday. A conscious attempt at reducing emotional stress amidst a society which fosters habitual stress can only compound frustration. I have written at length on the hypocrisy of the human race. History and empirical evidence more than bear out any rantings I may add. Part of that great hypocrisy is man's, especially contemporary man's, lip service to freedom and human dignity, when in reality his self-awareness is sustained by a series of masochistic maneuverings. This is where distress becomes so commonplace that it represents comfort, security, and fun. Such is the evolution of eustress from an otherwise distressful situation. Blatant examples of this transition are most common in an erotic context. The pleasure-pain factor is the entire basis of sadomasochistic activity. What invariably begins as an unpleasant experience evolves into an eagerly anticipated gratification. Here we have a basis for eustress phenomena. If a child receives little attention except through punishment, that child begins to court punishment. If punishment is received at the hands of someone who is stimulating, the attention is well worth it. Substitute that microcosmic situation with a macrocosmic one, in an adult world and without any overt sexual connotation. Here's the picture. A man feels insignificant. There is overpopulation and under-recognition. He is made to feel like a big shot because of his consumer power or a token title which his firm has bestowed upon him. He still feels insignificant. He is married and has a family which he might be able to feel pride in if less demands were placed upon him, which he is either loath or unable to meet. This makes him feel like a jackass. But he sees a guy on a TV show with whom he can identify. He feels a little better while watching the guy on TV or thinking of him. Still, he feels insignificant. He has a few heroes whom he sees on other TV shows. Sports figures, a tough cop, or a late-night talk show host. He lives vicariously through all of them. Unbeknownst to himself, he experiences his viciousness vicariously through his anger, indignation, and unrecognized identification with the friends and killers he sees on the news. But good or evil, benign or malignant, none of these people are him. They're getting attention. He's not. He feels insignificant. Well, if he feels insignificant, maybe, just maybe, it's because he is. It's not that he's dumber than some of those getting all the attention. Chances are good some of them are, in their own way, just as programmed as himself. But there's only room for so many to stand in a spotlight, and he's left out. What does he do? What alternatives are open to him to be able to pinch himself and know he is still there? He can get into some kind of trouble, great or small, and receive attention. The only drawback to that is he'll have to answer to a lot of questions and encounter situations which may be less culpable than his ennui. The other way is to get involved in something, anything, that will grab his emotions enough to qualify his existence. His very own problems are apparently not good enough for full-time mind occupancy. They're not serious on a world-shaking level. And nobody he talks to about them gives a shit. But if he burdens himself with common denominator crisis of a local, state, national, or international nature, he can find plenty of company, share grips, and make friendships and enemies, and generally feel as though he is all right. He has chosen a life of eustress and the safety which accompanies it, in preference to the solitary distress of living a dangerously unprogrammed life. Why is this man's unprogrammed life dangerous? Either because he has problems which are not universal enough to share, or because his mind is such a vacuum that its own resources cannot pull him out of his feeling of insignificance. Now, somewhere out there exist pretty sharp cookies who know about man's need for eustress, and are more than willing to supply it. Aside from being rather profitable, it masks, through the gifted art of misdirection, what's really happening. Everything is a softening up process for something else. You have been set up. You are being set up. Someone, somewhere, who is on the take is not missing a trick in the book. You have been conditioned to look in the wrong direction at the wrong things, find great fun in that which you should soberly evaluate, and take very seriously that which should be ridiculed and laughed out of sight and sound. Getting back to planned problems for entertainment enjoyment, the soap opera is a masterpiece. Its evolution is concurrent with eustress needs. When women had enough personal headaches in an epoch where women's work is never done, childbirth deaths and suicides over being compromised, there were no soap operas. Not that it was right, simply that no matter how devoid of imagination or how bored a woman may have been able to be, there was no chance of it usurping daily shit work requirements. Only the wealthy or spoiled could afford to be bored. When radio inaugurated the soap opera, the medium became the message. Misdirection. And women who listened while performing their chores were already being processed into a new form of consumerism. The troubles they heard were more interesting and romantic than their own, but they were troubles just the same. Hence, another woman's problems became a vicariously glamorous substitution for what could, with luck, be the listener's. The genesis of the soaper is pretty well defined. Now, most who view them neither toil nor spin while doing so, but simply absorb the blissful turmoil and sexy anguish, wide open for the inculcation of the real substance of the show, the products advertised. And the supreme irony is that the viewers prefer to believe they are more independent and emancipated, like the women on the screen, than ever before. In the Satanic Witch's considerable exploration into the world of eustress, the thrill rides of amusement parks are cited. In the late 1970s, sociologist Marcello Truzzi participated in a documentary on roller coasters which was narrated by Vincent Price. Dr. Truzzi's Dr. Truzzi's perceptive comments notwithstanding, it was interesting for me to see certain persons on the most dangerous rides let go of the safety rail despite repeated warnings. When I worked carnivals and parks, there were always the nuts who would let go at the wrong places. Sometimes they would fly out and even get themselves killed. My point is, even though coasters were safely tested, and eustress the motivating factor in riding, the lawsuits weren't honored if the ride at your own risk sign was displayed. The stupid, careless, and irresponsible member of society has helped to foster irresponsibility and devalue life and property. If I were to build a roller coaster, it will be shot through with visual and audio warnings to hang on and not stand up while the bar is in motion. Anyone failing to comply with the very real warnings would hurl to the ground. Eustress would then turn to distress, the distress of the unexpected. Curses by the dozen. Yes, you have been cursed. Every day you are the recipient of very real and magically formidable forces. One who is versed in the psychology of hexes generally evaluates them in terms of highly personal attacks, based on real or imagined injustices or slights. In short, you curse another to get revenge, or someone attempts to curse you for the same reason. In the sending of a curse, it is presumed that a strong degree of emotion must be the motivating factor. If one simply goes about throwing random hexes, supposedly nothing will happen. As the Satanic Bible explains, one should really mean it if any form of ritual magic is performed. The same text also states, though, that if you curse someone who is undeserving, nothing will happen. What is the standard of deserving? What constitutes a deserving victim? As we know, those qualities are also covered in the Satanic Bible. Assuming someone is not a deserving victim, though, they can be easily modified into a reasonable facsimile. In other words, they can be set up to act unreasonable, harbor guilt and fears, and generally behave in a manner that will attract disaster and court failure. The reason fortune tellers actually can curse people much of the time is because the seer's clients are ripe the moment they walk through the door. A benign or even tactful fortune teller or psychic will never really foretell bad tidings to a client, because a dire prophecy emanating from a credible source will most likely happen. The fact that a client wants to be told what is about to happen guarantees the reliability of whatever is forecast. Let's multiply this principle to a high social power, with media, the medium, and the public as the sitter or client. A public unused to doing its own thinking looks to diverse authorities for guidance, not to mention amusement. The general public is, quite literally, easy marks unlimited. Hence, it is easy to understand why their concerns and fears are prepackaged, and to someone else, profitable to prey upon. Each day you are bombarded with dire warnings and ill tidings. No news is good news is a truism. Good news doesn't sell. More people are working at media-related jobs than ever. It takes bad news in emergencies for them to keep their jobs. The more bad news you hear and read, the more depressed you become. Other people's bad news rubs off on you. Problems beget problems. Everywhere you turn, you are reminded of one of the myriad hazards to health, economic stability, or domestic tranquility. You are not supposed to be simply aware or prepared for unpleasant contingencies. You are supposed to be scared shitless. It's easy to scoff and say, I don't let that sort of thing get to me. But like it or not, it does. Theoretically, people should live longer because of medical advances over the past half-century. With its creature comforts, mass consumerism should have made lives happier. Egalitarian education should have made people smarter and more articulate. Instead, people are feeling sicker, sadder, and more tongue-tied than ever. Contemporary pulpit pounders blame it all on a breakdown of moral fiber and relaxing of spiritual values. If there is any value at all in that absurd claim, it is that if you are zealously self-righteous enough to be a religious nut, you won't feel any guilt about anything you do. Anything you see or hear will be ignored, and you may go about acting like a first-class son of a bitch with immunity. But then, if someone were honest enough to say, I will plunge headlong into spiritual values, just so the hype outside of the world won't get to me, the whole thing would be a contrivance, and its effect doomed to failure. Brainwashing is the only manner by which an individual of average intelligence can be filled with spiritual value. Those who come by it naturally are of subhuman mentality. This is a brutal and sensitive world, and the more it is populated, the greater the diversity of deceits and scams and setups become necessary for human survival. When Barnum declared, "A sucker is born every minute," he hadn't foreseen the Malthusian population increase of a century later. As I've stated, opportunities for individual expression haven't lessened. There are just more people around. Each, in his or her own way, is scrambling for survival. The Western world is a giant flea market of conflicting interests, hawking their wares. Competition is far beyond the point of free enterprise in its conservative sense. And even though you are, by necessity, one of the exploiters, you are also, from someone else's standpoint, a victim. You may be completely solvent financially, with an increasingly successful business, yet cursed by the effects of mass media in other ways. Your family or spouse may be an insurmountable problem, or you might be worried sick about heart attack, cancer, cystic fibrosis, AIDS, multiple sclerosis, sickle cell anemia, etc. Listen, kiddies, the day when family problems were as simple as in-laws, poor school grades, unwed motherhood, reform school and adultery, pale by comparison to the profound trauma suffered now domestically where none should even exist. The big killers of yesterday were tuberculosis and constipation, the latter being the most hyped. Sure, people died of other things, but weren't hexed into them ahead of time. They used to go crazy from masturbation, as it was claimed, and some most likely did from worry. The medical profession has the power to cure, but its propaganda techniques are flagrant curses. Christianity still harbors formidable opposition to birth control, yet whines about the plight of neglected children in underdeveloped countries, where missionaries are running the hospitals. Sponsor a foster child, exhorts a Christian, charity. If they really wanted to do something, they would fight those elements of their own religion who would stifle mandatory birth control. If you haven't guessed by now, the name of the game is give with one hand, take away with the other. You are being beaten down by the very thugs who will then come to nurse your wounds. As Satanists, you are just a tiny step closer to honesty, a wee bit tougher in the will department, and slightly more sensitive as a barometer. In this world of sameness, you are outrageously different, just in being a Satanist, and that alone is quite a distinction. The more individuality and freedom from thought pollution you can retain, the less affected by wholesale hexes you will be. Hatha toilet seat meditation. The best place to meditate is on the pot. If you have a comfortable toilet seat and a stout lock on the door, there's no telling what great thoughts might emerge. Martin Luther dreamed up Protestantism while sitting on the toilet at Wittenberg Monastery, and we know what a big movement that became. There is no place where one is as receptive to outside influences as on the toilet, with immersion in a hot bath second and the shower third. This is why a long-awaited phone call or ring of the doorbell will certainly occur under those conditions. The greater the state of relative helplessness one enters, the greater the receptivity. Requiring the most privacy, surpassing both bath or shower, the toilet is unexcelled in attracting outside impressions and influences. Those who wallow others to witness them in the bathtub, shower, or even engage in sexual intercourse will usually draw the line when it comes to receiving audience on the toilet. The toilet is the most sacrosanct vestige of isolation available in an otherwise crowded environment. Pressure on the vertebrae is relaxed while sitting on the throne, easing both mental and physical tension. Genitals are completely exposed and unhampered by clothing or pressure. If the chamber is sufficiently soundproofed, or any outside noise attains sufficient decibel levels, nonverbal utterances may freely proceed in any intensity or pitch and from any orifice. The infantile release of what we have been conditioned to hold back at all other times provides a psychological as well as physiological catharsis. With such conducive conditions to relaxation and receptivity, the brain will function more freely and range further afield for informational input. Many do their best reading on the toilet, absorbing input while releasing outflow. I once knew an elderly hermit, a brilliant scholar who had built a miniature castle in the woods of Northern California. Until his retirement, he had operated a large chain of theaters in England. After coming to the U.S., he purchased a small plot of land in the Redwoods and single-handedly constructed a fairy tale castle from odds and ends. Tiny gables and filials rose above the stone in the wood dwelling, which held 4 small rooms. To simplify plumbing and butane installation, he combined his kitchen and toilet facilities, the stove next to the john, with the table on which he dined in front of it. Thus he could sit on the toilet, prepare dinner off to one side, move the completed meal from the table, and sup. Neighbors from the surrounding area spoke derisively of the dirty hermit, despite being an impeccable dresser and a great intellect. Eventually, the iconoclastic old gent died, his little castle demolished, and a split level built on its site. Perhaps he had more than just convenience in mind when he combined his toilet and kitchen. I wonder how many people, if given the opportunity, would like to eat at the same time as eliminating. Caracalla, Diocletian, Nero did just that, and more. The toilet is more than a throne. It is a sacred chamber. Eustress, vampires, and vicariousness. As I have stated, the paradox where more people are talking dark forces up, down, and sideways, but fewer than ever are actually living as night people, provokes speculation. The moral here is that when everybody's talking, very few are doing. More time is spent comparing notes with aficionados than enjoying the hobby per se. In a puritanical society filled with the sort of fears and guilts that become a kind of security blanket, real displeasure ensues when there is a confrontation with the truly outre or bizarre. It's fun to be scared, so long as it is safe and predictable. For example, a person can enter a movie theater and see a horror film, at a reasonable hour, of course. There are hardly any more all-night theaters. After the film ends, no matter how frightening, there is the safety of the exit and a normal life outside. Amusement parks have always served the same purpose, and the roller coaster is designed to allow for daring, fun fear. By contrast, the unexpected experience, no matter how trivial, can be terribly unsettling. Nocturnal non-involvement is largely due to omnipresent vicariousness. It is easier, and presumably safer, to live out nocturnal fantasies through science fiction, gothic romance, and the aforementioned spate of horror films. Vicarious outlets abound in every facet of popular culture. Of human experience can adapt to vicarious expression. The real thing will be shelved. It has been observed that those who talk about sex the most do it the least. It is certain that the same principle applies in other areas. There is nothing morally wrong with vicariousness. Only when it compounds rather than relieves frustration is it harmful to a true individualist. It helps when the vicarious one recognizes his own vicariousness, though no one else need be the wiser. Many of the most esteemed business and professional people have built their entire reputation on carefully disguised vicariousness. There is a thin line between vicariousness and sublimation. Both are forms of substitution. The vicarious one substitutes another's life for his own. He lives off of someone else's identity. What he cannot or will not be, he finds in another person and assumes that role, usually in secret. When he becomes downright imitative, however, he is no longer vicarious, and must sink or swim according to his ability for mimicry. One can't be a wooden duck. Then, when the fox is coming, be unable to fly away. We are plagued with an age of sameness because so many people are content to imitate a handful of basic types. Hence a shortage of real characters. A character is not a creature of mediocrity, and even if he is imitative, his mimicry is so outlandish that he becomes a travesty. In today's society, people paradoxically desire safety, anonymity, and security on one hand, and lust for recognition, applause, and individuality on the other. As things have worked out, most live herd-like vicariously, pretending to be someone else. The dilemma is not so much in the drone life of the herd, but in the limited selection of role models. Any costume party amplifies the last statement. Costume shops will tell you that what vicarious role models are always in greater demand than others, when the protective lid is blown off for a masquerade. The insane are more likely to wear the shoes of their role models heavy-footedly. That's why nut houses are likely havens for Napoleons, Jesus Christ, Hitlers, and in recent years, Lucifers. In between the herd person and the Napoleons are those who have worked their vicariousness into gratifying sublimation. Have you ever noticed how most plainclothes cops look and act like the ones on TV police shows? Which came first? The answer should be obvious. Oscar Wilde was astute when he proclaimed his famous reversal, "Life follows art." He only went halfway, though. People imitate a life which is an art form, an artificiality to begin with. In short, they are imitations of a fabrication, human redundancies. Sublimation in its purest form is often self-realized. A foot fetishist becomes a shoe salesman, a necrophile, a mortician, a prostitute, a sociologist, a meddler into intimacies, a priest or psychiatrist, a racketeer, a legitimate businessman. The list grows quite long. I knew a young guy who was studying to be a mortician many years ago. People always got around to the question, after much verbal detouring, "Why do you want to be a mortician?" The reply was, "Because I like to play with dead bodies." That is what is known as pulling the rug out from under. Million de Harlequin, Bestial Giuba, et al. But the theater itself seems to me so puny, against the hourly drama of life itself, that for me, at least, it becomes an anticlimax. Gene Fowler. It has often been said, the world is a stage, and we're all actors. Interpreted in its most ego-gratifying way, this maxim closely rivals Ipsissimus Crowley's, every man and woman is a star. Reality, however, like the theater, is far less democratic in its central casting office. The world is a stage, but few qualify as bona fide actors. Most are spear carriers, supporting players, in short, reactors. Although those players are necessary foils for few true actors, even they must be selected with care. A mammoth spectacle employing a cast of thousands is not necessarily good, any more than a world made better by overpopulation. The big trouble is, as Jimmy Durant used to say, everyone wants to get into the act. Satanism has done nothing to discourage the would-be fool to step on stage. It has left him at the mercy of the severest critics, his fellow creatures. He has no God smiling from the balcony and provoking him with a scant round of applause. No kindly deity will chuckle at his lousy jokes, nor nod approval at his histrionics. Thus, Satanism serves as the great separation process. Consequently, Satanism can be disastrous for those who see it as a shortcut to God's manship. I have often said that the popularity of occultism and the waning of orthodox religion can be attributed to the do-it-yourself God kit factor. Man feels he can control, at least in part, his own destiny, rather than the Greyhound bus deity doing the driving for him. As such, occultists in general, and Satanists in particular, place themselves on stage in a manner never before seen. Obviously, one alternative to obstacles arising from such mastery of oneself is to grab a spear and try to support the leading players as competently as possible. Another alternative is to leave the stage completely and become part of a discerning audience. The third and only other escape from the drama is to leave the theater. What then can one do? Search for other spectacles and amusements where a measure of recognition or at least enjoyment might be found? Impossible. The world stage never varies in its presentation. To become an actor, one must be unique. To become a member of the audience requires discrimination. To leave the theater means annihilation of the mind and body. Yes, the world is not simply a stage, but a Barnum and Bailey world, just as phony as it can be. For the world to become any more truthful, we'd all have to come to better grips with the facts. I like to think that Satanists are more likely to have the scales fall from their eyes. It helps me keep the faith. Nonconformity, Satanism's greatest weapon. An individualist must always live in his own world, not one created by others' standards. There will always be plenty of people who will share a nonconformist world with him and be as happy for it as the maverick might be to have others share his. The very essence of Satanism is described by its semantic designation, the other. A person who comfortably accepts the dictates of popular culture might be sympathetic or even enthused about Satanism, but he cannot be termed a Satanist. A true Satanist, even if unspoken, must be responsible for reaction and change. It has been argued that conformity is comfortable, and so it is, if it agrees with one's digestion. Some individuals cannot eat whatever is placed before them, however. Unfortunately, a starving person will usually eat indiscriminately, and once his belly is full, even begins to like it. Most people, being emotionally starved animals, lack imagination and personality, and are content to accept whatever is imposed upon them. unless, of course, they are told they must worry or become angry over certain issues. Planned protest is no different than programmed complacency to a real Satanist. A Satanist should not allow himself to be programmed by others. He should fight tooth and nail against it, for that is the greatest enemy to his freedom of spirit. It is the very denial of life itself, which was given to him for a wondrous, unique experience, not for imitation of the colorless existence of others. If the definition of magic is the change in situation or events in accordance with one's will, which would, using normally accepted methods, be unchangeable, it would seem that any successful magical working is an act of nonconformity. The greater one's natural degree of nonconformity, the greater are one's magical powers. One's will, particularly as it pertains to magical success, is an important commodity. But strong-willed should not be confused with willfulness. Just about everyone nowadays is an extremely willful zombie, blustering along on wills not their own. Grim determination abounds, but it comes second-hand. Its motivation does not emanate from the creative region of the brain, only the response centers. A person devoid of special ability must work harder to become special, which often results in an abrasive pretense of infallibility. Combine the overachiever's pseudo-specialty with his hauteur of infallibility, and all that's lacking to complete the profile of contemporary cool is freeze-dried nonconformity. If nonconformity is Satanism's strength, planned or put-on nonconformity is its greatest weakness. The predictable antics of heavy-handed, quote, Satanists are quite profitably exploited by non-Satanists. I foresee a return to slavery once money becomes worthless. In fact, it will become more desirable to become a self-realized, pleasing slave than a silly, incompetent master. The ratio of masters to slaves is today an unrecognized lampoon. Now that everyone's a big shot and everything's a big deal, it doesn't appear as if slavery exists. It does, but in a half-assed way. Only the term is taboo, out of earshot, out of mind. When there is no buying power, only barter and human desirability will be of value. Then, those who can accomplish things will be in demand rather than those who simply exist and collect their checks. The reversal of sacred or tiresome standards, whether they are attitudinal or sensory, is the better part of true nonconformity. That's why the reverse status of the slave is coming into its own. When it is realized that puffed-up inadequacy without buying power is a liability, you'll begin seeing the following slogan: it is better to be used than to be useless. Anyone's identity rests upon recognition, appreciation, in short, the knowledge that he or she has a reason for existing. We know that a multitude exists for no other reason than to keep the money circulating. What this multitude can purchase buys with them their illusory identity. The multitude actually buy into the notion that they are important. Or do they? Is there a demon within each of them, jabbing a pitchfork of doubt? I believe there is. That is why they're quick to air their feelings, that they believe something is wrong, even though they can't quite identify what it is. They are smugly pleased that the jobs they gold brick, which could be done in a fraction of the time by fewer people, pay such good wage. Their leisure time, activity-oriented, yet they are nagged by the thought that something is wrong. That something wrong is despondency, based upon a feeling of inadequacy, compounded by illusions of worthiness and pretensions of importance. In the future, human beings will be barter. It's time humans became accustomed to it. How to be God, or the devil. Those with illusions of omnipotence should consider the prerequisites for deification. If you really have the makings of a higher being, here are some handy guidelines. 1. Don't advertise. Just let your presence be known. Never, under any conditions, go around proclaiming yourself to be the devil. Others must recognize you as such. The reason the God of the Christians, the fiction known as Christ, doesn't make regular appearances at concerts, book signing parties, or other backyard barbecues is because he doesn't have to. There are plenty of followers who will advertise his existence for him, not to mention attesting to personal acquaintanceship. If you are a first-rate devil, others will do your advertising for you, whether you ask for it or not. 2. Never be fashionable. Always be mysterious and enigmatic. Remember, man follows his gods, and his gods are never trendy. You never met a god who wanted to be part of the crowd. That's why it has been said that the Lord works in mysterious ways, or why an unexpected catastrophe is called an act of God. 3. You must be creative. Take inspiration from the most sordid sources if necessary, but never imitate. Rip-off artists cannot proclaim themselves divinities because they lack the originality or creativity to come up with fresh ideas, let alone new worlds. 4. You must have style, class, be reserved, show some restraint. If you can't be decorous around other people, how can you maintain order and control? 5. A sense of humor is a must. A God who can't laugh at himself or find comic relief is a dull Jehovah, and most definitely unsatanic. Fernando de Plancy, an intimate glimpse of a little-known Satanist. It is doubtful that most readers of occult literature will come across the name Fernando de Plancy. The man and his works are well known in the fields of microbiology and genetics. Few seekers of the lore of ceremonial magic are, however, aware of the vast contributions he has made. De Plancy was born to humble parents in Lisbon, Portugal, on September 28, 1887. His mother, Felicia, and father were getting on in years when little Fernando, the last of 8 children, was born. If we are to believe historians, Fernando's parents felt ill-equipped to raise their child and migrated to the Azores after finding a maiden aunt to care for him. Soon growing to young manhood, Fernando and aunt moved to England and took up residence a short distance from Blackpool with a couple who operated a small roadside pub. Unbeknownst to Fernando, MacGregor Mathers, who was to become Aleister Crowley's mentor, was a frequent visitor to the tavern. It seems likely that Mathers initiated the lad into the mysteries of the Golden Dawn. No one knows exactly how much magical curricula Fernando underwent. In 1905, at the age of 18, Fernando emigrated to America. Unable to afford college, he took a position in Buffalo, New York, as a baggage boy at the train depot. Meanwhile, he devoured all books on scientific themes that he could lay his hands on. One such volume was Captain John G. Bork's Scatologic Rites of All Nations. Chapter 24, Obscene Survivals in the Games of English Rustics, especially intrigued him, as did the views of Galen in connection with the medicinal use of cerumen, or earwax. He read Rosinus Lentilius's Physico Medicarum, which relates that there was a certain old hypochondriac of 50 or more, who, in order to ease himself of an obstinate constipation, for more than a month drank copious draughts of his own urine, fresh and hot, but with the worst results. Young de Plancy felt his destiny promised more than baggage handling. Leaving his job at the railway station, he devoted all of his time to studies, which by that time had developed to the level of experimentation. Drawing again from Lentilius, Duplanty discovered Christian Franz Paulini's Fifth Pharmacy, published in Frankfurt, 1696. The only available English translation, by Smith and Pratt's, left much to be desired and could not be relied upon. Several bouts with insomnia inspired Duplanty to ingest donkey dung as per Paulini's directions. Though he found his sleep improved, his dreams got worse. Nightmares were preferable to sleeplessness, and so Duplanty extracted from the same source book a remedy for vertigo, which had been disturbing him since he fell from a hayloft as a child. Duplanty's discovery of the medicinal value of peacock droppings deserves more than a cursory glance. It suggests a long-dormant association of the bird with both Satanism and moon worship. The peacock, we know, was the bird that drew the car of Juno, and that goddess was as much a lunar deity as Diana. Taking 1-gram doses of the droppings improved Duplanty's condition to such an extent that he could climb to the roof of his lodging and stand at its edge without the slightest dizziness. It was during one of his nocturnal rooftop vigils that Fernando espied the lighted window of a neighboring building, which had the reputation of being a house of ill repute. With no shade drawn, it was apparent that the lighted room was the washroom. Soon a man appeared before the squalid toilet basin and relieved himself. Moments later, after he left, a rather dowdy woman entered to answer the call of nature. Duplanty began to reel, not from any sordid sexual motivation, but in recollection of what he had read on page 337 of Bork's aforementioned book on scatologic rites. It was a personal letter from Professor E.H. Horsford of Harvard University to Captain Bork, stating, "I have recently been informed, by a man who is acquainted with the peculiarities of Parisian life, that there are men who are in the habit of swallowing the scum which they obtain from street urinals, and they are known as les mangeurs de blanc." It was at that moment of heightened epiphany that Fernando Duplanty grasped what his life work was to be. Sometime in the spring of 1910, Duplanty, feeling that in order to expand his knowledge and develop his theories he must venture further afield than Buffalo, New York, set out to tour the back roads and byways of America. He had saved a modest research fund from his earnings at the whorehouse, where he had persuaded the lady in charge to engage him as a part-time janitor and stiff towel collector. Though his remuneration was small, Duplanty was more than rewarded by certain activities that were germane to his studies. I will not bore the reader with unimportant details of his departure and first stages of his travels, other than to mention that while in Peoria, he was robbed of his wallet by a pickpocket who deftly reached into his lowered trousers while he sat in the cubicle of a public toilet. The crapper worker was apprehended the following week in the same lavatory, but having spent Duplanty's money, was unable to make restitution. That justice had been served, and the culprit sent to jail was of little help to Fernando's pocketbook. Fortunately, he had pinned a reserve supply of cash to his undershirt, and with that sum was able to proceed on his journey. A big breakthrough came in Arkansas, where Duplanty met the famous author and chronicler of Latrinalia, Cheek Sales. Together, Duplanty and Sales explored their interests as far west as Waco, whence Duplanty proceeded alone to El Paso. It was in this city that Fernando discovered the delights of the beer from the country south of the border. Known as cerveza, it was substantially different from the English ale to which Duplanty had become accustomed in his youth. Interestingly, the Latin name for beer or ale is cerevisia, which would seem to be a derivative from the name of that goddess employed in her libations, and held sacred as the means of producing the condition of inebriation, which in pagan nations had been looked upon as sacred. Exploring this custom of antiquity, Duplancy remained in El Paso for the better part of 28 years in relative obscurity, consuming large quantities of cerveza. In 1938, a government official in charge of recreating an authentic American slum for the Federal Building exhibit at the forthcoming World's Fair in San Francisco espied Duplancy in a drunken state sleeping under the urinal in the men's room of a local cantina. Prodding him gently with his foot, he awakened Fernando, who wakened and explained that he had fallen asleep from the fatigue of his research. Within 24 hours, both scholar and sponsor were headed for California on a Santa Fe Pullman car. It was contracted that throughout the duration of the fair, Duplancy would recline in a littered doorway of the proposed slum complex. Adjacent to the tableau was to be a theater where every 2 hours a film, 1/3 of a nation, would be shown to visitors touring the mock slum. While the film presentation was in progress, Duplancy would be free to take a break, as it were. As it developed, Fernando discovered means to peep into the restrooms of the attraction, and did so whenever time and circumstances permitted, thus furthering his research. The reader may now be wondering what bearing Fernando's studies and lifestyle had to do with his subsequent contribution to Satanism. In 1943, at the age of 56, Fernando Duplancy was working as a tool checker at an aircraft plant in Burbank, California, helping his Uncle Sam, he had since become a U.S. citizen, with the war effort. One morning, a bright and cheerful young lady approached him with a request for a monkey wrench. Something about her face seemed familiar. As it turned out, she had sat next to Duplancy on the previous day. They exchanged pleasantries, and in the course of conversation she revealed that it was her great-uncle, who was young Fernando's guardian at the roadside pub in England. The young lady's current husband was a flyer with the RAF, and the third cousin twice removed of Alistair Crowley. The two became fast friends, during which time Beryl, which was the young lady's name, initiated Duplancy into the mysteries of the Grampian flagellants, while the older Duplancy imparted essentials of his years of research to his new friend. A ritualistic alliance had indeed been established, and soon the two, in concert, were paving the way for the stuff of which latter-day journalists would be able to relate to an emerging Church of Satan. Unfortunately, Beryl returned to England only to discover that her marriage was invalid and she had been deceived. She later married a pathetic young man and was subsequently murdered by John Christie of the infamous 10 Rillington Place. Fernando Duplancy, having become a full-blown admitted devil worshipper, was killed on August 14, 1945, when he was struck by a flying toilet which had been ripped loose by a victory celebrant and thrown from the balcony of the theater in which he sat watching God is My Co-Pilot.